Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So today's upload is going to be a video about the long range, but mainly focused on pattern, not really a storm in particular, just what we could expect with the pattern, and it looks pretty interesting. It looks like a rather more unique pattern could be unfolding. You do have a name for it. It has occurred many times already, but definitely an interesting pattern. So let's get right into this video. If you would guys like to subscribe to this channel, that would be amazing. If you could like the video, that would be awesome as well. You know, if you're you like weather related content, this channel is for you. And if you like you know, if you're a returning fan, then consider liking the videos. That helps out a lot. Let's get into this video. So right now we're looking at the GFS model, and you can see that it has quite a bit of activity. We have a storm to the north of us. It's really not that far to the north though. It's across southern southern Canada, affecting places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan. And you can see that there's quite a bit of precipitation going on. These storms aren't really that widespread, but they are packing a punch right now. As I'm recording this, they are across central Wisconsin. It is pretty late at night, almost 3 o'clock in the morning. It is a bit late, but nothing atypical, or nothing, I guess, not typical for me at this time. I don't know, I just tend to sit up late. That's when that's when I'm most productive. And notice that we have a large storm, right? And it seems like GFS really is on point with the European with this storm. They've been agreeing all along. And the thing is, now what interesting thing that happens is we start getting this heat building across a good portion of the country into the plains, and you can see that we start building these rain showers, right? And earlier there was thinking that we could see bigger, you know, individual storms, just like the one we saw this week, or just like the one we're seeing right now. And you can see that it's not really the case. We start seeing a little bit of some storm activity, but mainly what we see is a classic ring of fire pattern. So notice that ring of fire, for those that don't know, I know many people don't, but I know some of you do for sure. It's basically when we have a really high, a really strong high pressure. Usually just it's built, the high pressure is built around with heat, and all high pressures in the northern hemisphere spin clockwise, the winds around it. So what it does, it basically steers any precipitation that it has in its vicinity in a fashion like this. And obviously this varies to whether or not the high pressure is bigger or stronger or weaker or smaller. But you can see that the storm track usually is somewhat like this, and it kind of stays in that area. And that's actually kind of dangerous, because if these areas could get very flooded, lots of precipitation, because that's it. You know, if this high pressure stays for a long time, then we just get bands and bands of precipitation coming across this area. And really this high pressure blocks a lot of these southern areas to see, or, you know, the area where the high pressure is over. It blocks a lot of these areas to see from seeing any significant precipitation, which is bad, since usually it's a dome of hot air, so it's dry and hot. That leads to some drought. And then again, the southern tip of this could also be wet, because of that's where the storms kind of take a track. And if you were to notice across the peninsula of Florida, we are noticing a lot of storm activity that is actually going east to west, which isn't really too common across the northern hemisphere. And you can see that a lot of this precipitation is flowing this way, and you can see that any storm that does develop, now these showers in the central part of the country are overdone. If you could see this, play this into faster motion, we see just these this rain just getting whipped to the south. We see another low pressure tries making its way to the north, it gets whipped to the south, and notice it stays dry here, right? And then we see that this stays like that for a while, for a good week. We just see that spinning motion. If I could play that really quickly, you could see that spinning around a high pressure. And this occurs from around this upcoming Saturday, really late this week into early next week, into mid next week. And then that's when we can start seeing a pattern break up. We get some precipitation into the areas where it was drier, but what we also get is a blast of cool air according to the GFS. Now, how cold is this air gonna be, or whether or not it's actually gonna happen? Let's take a look. First of all, actually, change of mind. Let's look at the total accumulated precipitation to show you basically what could happen during this ring of fire pattern. Notice that generally, look at the south, very dry, not much precipitation, a little bit of precip here. This may be a bit overdone, but notice a lot of precip to the north as well, generally more generous than to the south. And then by the Gulf Coast, really just the Gulf of Mexico itself, seeing more loads of precipitation. But you can see that, notice how we see this spinning. If you just look at this very carefully, we see precip develop here and here, not really the central part of the country, and we see kind of like a spinning fashion. And that's how the storms ride. And the European actually amplifies this a little bit more than the GFS, this ring of fire pattern. So I'll show you that in just a minute. But let's look at the 2-meter temperature anomalies at this time. Notice there's a pretty nice cool-off going on across this country. The middle part of the country, and this could be the thing that really breaks up this ring of fire pattern. And you can see, notice it's warm in the middle, cooler at the edges, but it's really not that visible in terms of temperature. Really, it's a precip that does a number. But notice that we see basically a cool off around starting late next week. Around Thursday, Friday, but really we see a significant pattern change coming in from the north around the beginning of August, which is still fairly far out, but you can see we have a bunch of cooler air. And the thing is that the GFS has been relatively darn consistent with this. You can see the 18Z model run even more showing even more cold air, and this would definitely bring temperatures, daytime temperatures, I mind you, 18Z Monday, August 3rd, into the 60s and 70s, and keeps the temperatures to the south. So this would definitely break up that pattern, but it's again adding to the uniqueness of the long-range forecast. We could be looking at a ring of fire pattern, then followed by a massive cool-off that could be pretty significant, or we could be looking at more of a ring of fire pattern persisting if this cool-off doesn't happen. If you were to look at the European model, notice that it has, again, this dome of heat right here across the central part of the country. Very hot, very warm air. And the cooler air does try making its way in here. You can see kind of cuts, slices in there. Whether or not it will be that successful, we'll have to see. The European has it at a way less success rate than what the GFS has. But I wanted to show you windy.com, and let's see this. Windy.com, we have the next 10-day forecast. Notice and not snow, let's look at rain accumulations. You can see that we do see the ring of fire really set up. It's a bit further to the south. You can see Oklahoma just bone dry, almost absolutely nothing. A bit wetter across the Ohio, not really, the central Mississippi Valley. You can see right here across Missouri into parts of southern Iowa and into central Illinois. Then it stays wet to the north by Minnesota, Wisconsin, UP, and Michigan, wet, but then really dry across the southern United States, and then wetter towards the Gulf Coast, including the peninsula of Florida. But you can see that ring of fire definitely occurring and impacting a large area, while this area just stays bone dry. But anywhere around it, it's quite a bit of precipitation. You can see a lot of precip occurring across the mountains, and that's due to this Gulf of Mexico moisture just spinning around in a circle, basically revolving around this high pressure, which is just going to bring scorching temperatures. And if you were to actually look at the 8 to 14-day outlook, it shows that well, you know, this is a bit further out than what the ring of fire pattern is, but you can see it kind of keeps that consistency. It doesn't go with the cool-off, which what the GFS is showing. It keeps that, you can see hot center across the central part of the country. And if that were to happen, let me tell you, that would bring in another setup around this time frame, 8 to 14-day outlook, late July into early August, another ring of fire pattern probably occurring across the central part of the country, maybe a bit further to the north this time. But so let's take a look, and again, late August to late July into early August. But let's look at the 6 to 10-day outlook. You can see it's more centered across the north and cooler across the southern United States. Not southern, southwestern United States and Alaska. That's really the only cool location. Anywhere else, it's quite a bit of warm temperatures. And we'll have to see whether or not the cool-off occurs. There's a bit lower confidence in terms of the heat in the 8 to 14-day outlook. You can see that the chance has really gone down. Now, I would like to show you the GFS. I already showed you the GFS. I want to show you the Canadian precipitation amounts. Really, usually I don't look at the Canadian, but it's interesting enough to take a glance at it once in a while. Notice it does have a bit more drastic cool-off than what the European is showing. Not as drastic as what the GFS is showing, but definitely signals a little bit of a cool off here around a 240-hour period, which could be interesting. Again, the GFS doesn't really have much at 240 hours. Definitely does have a little bit, but the more significant one comes in later. And the Canadian and the European models just don't go out that far. They only go out to 240 hours. But let's look at the precipitation amounts, what the Canadian is showing. You can see generally less across the south, more across the central United States, which has been a pattern. This one's a little bit still further to the south oriented than, say, the European or the GFS, where they had a lot of precipitation across the Northwoods into, Minnesota, the UP of Michigan, a lot of those areas seeing way more precipitation in terms of rainfall. So that's basically it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Consider liking the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode. See ya. Bye.